All right, welcome to part 2 of our conversation. I'm going to start off with just a roll call so folks can hear who's in the room, and then we'll get into the agenda for today. And have you start and say your name and organization.
Sure. Jay Harrington, Routt County.
Jason Peasley, Yampa Valley Housing Authority.
Emily Katzman, Yampa Valley Housing Authority.
Gail Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council.
Lou Tortora, YVHA.
Dave Barnes, Steamboat Springs City Council.
Tom Reeson, City of Steamboat Springs.
Kathy Meyer, YVHA.
Great. Okay, so we had an initial agenda for today, but it's getting switched around a little bit because we've heard a request to return back to a part of the conversation we left off on yesterday around the commitment to the process. What are we doing here in this room together? Why are we doing it? And what will it look like to make it successful? We want to get clear on this before moving forward to make sure that we do have consensus support for doing that before moving into the next steps, is what it sounds like. So that I have these elements on the agenda of other pieces of returning to that conversation of elements of governance and decision-making, jumping into a deeper dive on spectrum of community engagement, and then pulling this together if we decide that this is worthwhile to keep moving forward. For folks who are online, this is part 2 of a conversation that started yesterday. Both recordings will be available online. This is a working meeting, so we will not have a space for open comment, but we invite you to observe and see the process. Okay, so before we get into commitment to the process, I just have 3 slides that I want to pull forward because I think that there's a lot of questions about clarity in this conversation about what we're here for and what we're doing. So I want to give just a little bit of, from Clark and I's perspective, what we heard as what we're solving for in this. But then what I'll do is I'll open it up all to you and invite you to share your stories of why we're coming to this table, what you hoped for in this process, what you might see as the risks of not going through a process like this, but also what are your concerns about this process so that we can see if there's a way to move forward or not, and we'll make that decision. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So the first thing that I want to chat through is I had mentioned Adam Kahania yesterday in his book, Collaborating with the Enemy, and I just wanted to kind of talk through what we see as a couple of different choices you can make when approaching collaboration or when approaching what he calls problematic situations. So at a very high level, we can think about the lack of affordable housing in Steamboat Springs and Routt County as a problematic situation, right? So the first question we ask ourselves is, can we change the situation? For some folks in the community, they say, no, I don't have the power to change this situation, which leads them to their next question. Can I bear the situation as it is? Can I endure it, basically? For some folks, they say, yeah, it's not great, but I'm going to adapt. Maybe I'll move outside of Steamboat Springs. I'll move into the county and I'll commute. Or maybe I'm willing to pay more than 30% of my income on rent or housing here. That's a way of adapting. If their answer is no, they might exit, right? Move to a different place, right? For the folks who are here in this room, generally the answer to this has been, yes, I think I can change this situation. Which brings us to our next question. Can we affect this change unilaterally by ourselves? And that could be me as an individual or me as an organization, right? Can I use unilateral action to change this all on my own? And in that case, the easiest action here is force, to just do the darn thing in some ways, right? What we oftentimes find with complicated issues with like housing is that unilateral action is difficult, and that pushes us into collaboration. Now, there's 2 different types of collaboration that Adam talks about, which depends on whether or not we can control this change. In a sense, can we control what the collaboration looks like? If yes, this looks like conventional collaboration. You get everybody on the same page, you develop a shared mission, you act all in harmony together. But what Adam sees is oftentimes in situations similar to your own, it requires stretch collaboration where you don't have a unifying vision of how you're moving forward. You continuously iterate together on different steps to say, okay, can we take the next step forward together? And you start to need to change your behavior instead of how can I change what others are doing, change how do I show up to this collaboration to see what we can get as a different output. So we can see that this group of people is a group of people who have across the board said, yes, we think we can make a change in the community. But as we start getting into this work and divide on what we think are the pathways forward, we start returning to our options of whether or not we collaborate, force, adapt, or exit at different points. At its simplest, we're bringing you to the table together to see what would collaboration look like. You might choose at the end of today to choose a different option, knowing that from your vantage point, you think you might have more success if you exit, adapt, or try to use force to move your way forward. So I just want to be really clear on like, those are the options on the table here. When we're talking about governance, we're talking about what would it look like for you all to collaborate together, okay? Now let's get into the elements of governance. So just to make this more clear from the case studies so that we can have some language about what we're talking about with the elements of governance that we could design or redesign. When we pulled each of these case studies out, they highlight different elements of governance. The first three really hit on that value of inclusion, of where are implementation partners involved and who are those key stakeholders. So like one of them, for example, showed one implementation partner could be a school district who's actually at the decision-making table. That would be a difference from how you all did it in the past. That's the types of questions you all could think through. Financial partners being a different key stakeholder of where are they involved in the process? Where do you need them to have a role in governance or just buy-in into this process? And then where are you engaging the larger community as well? Then there's pieces around your different roles that are part of governance. So what the case studies also outlined is where people played the role of owner, developer, and manager in the different case studies. And what that looked like depending if those were all the same role or different roles. In some cases, there was a delegation of responsibility where a given entity delegated responsibility to potentially like a private developer to play one of those roles. In some cases, the ownership changed hand in those case studies, right? Where the land was sold to a different partner in the process and then a new governance was taken on, right? Organizational structure is that piece of what's the containers in which these decisions are being made. In this case, you have city government, we have county here, we have YVHA that was created as a major structure for making these decisions. But there's other pieces that we saw in these case studies, which is when do you need a collaborative group? One had the example of a community advisory group that was nested within the housing authority to then make choices. At its simplest, this group could be coming together to say, governance-wise, what's the new version of BRAC? What's the version of BRAC that's going to make us successful, right? We put all of this on the table in terms of case studies so you can see the wide spread of different options, knowing that, I think you said it, like there's a lot of variety in the different ways that people have done this work. So it's not necessarily that there's a cookie cutter solution, but these are the choices that you get to decide within. And then there's these sort of like intangible elements in some ways of where does the clarity of the need, opportunity, that vision for what happens live within the governance structure? Who owns that vision of where you're headed and what you need to accomplish in producing this housing? And then the last piece, which is the question that a lot of you asked, was what was the culture of collaboration? What was the way of acting together that got them to success? These are all elements of what this group can think through, what's going to make us successful this time in terms of governance, right? There's also all of these elements of governance add up to thinking through where are we making decisions. So we just mapped out a rough version of in Brown Ranch 1.0 where these decisions sat. So a great deal of decisions based on the IGA agreement and the responsibility endowed to YVHA sat in terms of, okay, designing the site, getting public involvement, figuring out financing, selecting the developers, and then submitting that plan for annexation. The City of Steamboat then played a role in the decision-making related to regulation, as well as the parameters within which YVH sits and the annexation agreement. Now that changed over time when we then had the Steamboat community do the final approval, or in this case, non-approval of annexation. So this tells us where these decisions are in the who is accountable for these different decisions, right? This doesn't tell us what is the ways that you all consult with one another across these decisions. When do different folks need to be informed, and how do you collaborate together? So that was the big value that came up across. There's accountability and transparency were frequently cited as those top. So in some ways, that would be the charge of this group, is figuring out what does that look like from what we know now. Is there anything that needs to change? And then what gets added to it that helps us live into those values? Okay, that's my story of how I arrived here to organize this group a little bit. But now I want to hear your all stories, and I'm going to pull this slide up just for background. This was the initial kind of outline of what our purpose and objectives as a group would be. And would love to hear from folks their story of how they got to this table in terms of what are your hopes and concerns for this process.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm very confused about the word governance. It's got many meanings, different things, it's everywhere. What I don't know is, what do we think the governance structure was the first time around? And why would we change it? Okay. I look at the way that, 4 votes, YVHA and affordable housing on 3 of them. The last one was the annexation. That didn't work. I think there are a bunch of reasons for that. Some of them are associated with personalities, people working against the project actively, some on city council doing that actively. So this time around, the city wants to be part of the process. I'm really glad. I'm glad that that's how it should be. So I'm struggling with, reading through all of these examples of creating some third-party organization, LLC, whatever you want to call it, in order to make decisions. I'm comfortable we could come to consensus in this group right here and say, this is what we'd like to do. That's my view.
I want folks to answer your question about what are we trying to solve for?
Okay.
What didn't work about the last governance? But before I do that, will you explain to me in your terms how you understood governance or current governance?
I'm not sure there is current governance. The way the project took place, and I wasn't here for a lot of that, was YVHA solicited input through a steering committee. That steering committee somehow directed, and Ace and Emily probably know better than I, a consultant, a professional community planner, to pull together a community plan. And that's what was created on the property. Now, there was a demand study, so obviously there was information associated with how big it had to be in order to meet the needs. It was phased. There was a lot of intermittent steps in terms of solving the problem. But I couldn't tell you how decisions got made.
Yeah, so let me kind of explain the previous process. So YVHA, knowing that this was essentially its enormous community asset, went out, brought in a team of community members to be the steering committee to help identify what the vision would be for that property. And the first step was in creating the guiding principles. And those were the things that sort of drove most of the decision making. So there was an agreement at the beginning on these are the most important things to us in order. Delivering housing being the first guiding principle. That group ultimately made recommendations to the Housing Authority Board as to this is what we think the master plan should be. That master plan was then adapted into an annexation agreement and proposed to the city. And then, we went through the whole BRAC process, sitting in this room, thinking about it makes me nauseous. And then, I think the concept moving forward was that YVHA would be the vision keeper, the owner, and then delegate development responsibility to the master developer. So we would retain control over the vision with the developer partner being the implementing arm, if you will. Executing on the agreements of the annexation agreement and with guidance from the master plan. There was discussion about also creating several other structures underneath that to help guide primarily like community engagement around that. Like, so having community ownership of the master plan kind of moving forward so that, as the housing authority was the vision keeper for a period of time, it would then be delegated over to this other entity. It was similar to kind of how a community land trust functions. So it's like a third experts, a third community members, and a third this sort of like governing body. Anyhow, all of that was sort of contemplated. The reality is that none of that's implementable, if you will, because there's no annexation, there's no thing to govern over. So.
Mhm. And I'm asking this not necessarily because I want to make sure we're on the same page of what our understanding of that governance was and why we might look at it again, right? Does anybody want to add into that story of how they maybe understood it differently?
I thought that was pretty good explanation.
Okay, so then we're going to return to Lou's question of why revisit governance?
I think if we were to rethink governance, and this is something that Dave, you mentioned to me and got my wheels turning yesterday, is, we did a steering committee and it was I don't know, from my perspective, working on that for a year and a half, 2 years was a very good process of bringing in community input. We had tons and tons of opportunities for people to provide feedback. But what was missing from that, so if I was to critique that process, was we didn't have the city sitting at the table. We didn't have a ton of representation of the voting community. We had a lot more representation of the people that were maybe the end users of the product. And the county was, they believe, they were listening.
Well, the city and county attended every meeting remotely and listened in.
Right.
Didn't drive the discussion by design, just to lay that out there.
Right. And so they weren't there to say, I think if we were to redo this again, not to call out John Snyder, but to call out John Snyder to say, guys, we can talk about a 1,000-unit project, but we got a 400-unit threshold on water. So I just want you guys to know that, to bring in pieces of reality to the conversation, because we started incredibly big. Wondering, is this a 50-year vision, a 100-year vision, a 20-year vision? And then had to narrow that down. That was by design, but had to narrow it down based on the realities of the situation. But I think at this point, doing the steering committee 2.0 process with a narrower scope, with a different set of representation, making sure the city's at the table, the county's at the table, voters are at the table, and with an expressed purpose of like, bring us back the next Brown Ranch annexation, I think is like, to me, I think the task that we have in front of us right now.
Yeah. I think one of the other challenges with the first process was that we went through this long process to develop the plan, and then we presented it to the city through YVHA's annexation request. And so one way that we could do it differently would be to be working through what I think through the first process we've already identified as some of the stickiest issues with an annexation, and to try to solve those as we're coming up with a new development plan. I think that would be a fundamentally different way to approach it.
I think that's a great idea, because I mean, we ran into quite a few sticky points, right? Parks, water, traffic. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows
Size, yeah.
Size, physical impact to the city.
I equate it to like the historic preservation used to work, where you would have to submit your application for your building permit and get it all approved, and then you would go before the historic preservation board, and then they would want you to make revisions. And that's kind of like the same process that Brown Ranch, in my mind, went through, right? They got everything done, everything ready, packaged, and then people wanted to make revisions, and at that time it's almost too late, or it's too cost prohibitive to go back and start from square one and redesign.
So we've heard now from a couple of voices from YVHA on kind of what you all see as the possibilities for revision on governance. I'd love to hear from a city perspective of what you hoped for in coming into a conversation like this, what you saw as the value of moving through a process like this.
Okay. I'll start. I mean, I think it's a lot of what's been talked about, right? From the perspective of having everybody at the table from the start, right? In the sense of, I think as you mentioned, right, from the perspective of there was a lot of work done, but I think the city and the county were not as integrated and engaged in it as I think needs to be in terms of making it effective. And I think by also having us here at the table too, we bring in that transparency and we bring in that accountability from the perspective of making sure that we're bringing the community along. I do think it's also about making sure that we have kind of a shared vision as to really what the goal is in terms of all, kind of the whole facet, right? Not only obviously housing being priority, but what kind of housing, and then what's the potential impact, for lack of a better term, in terms of to the community. So, I think from my perspective, I think, kind of what's being talked about, but I think it's also important to remember who owns kind of what piece from that perspective too, right? That we are here and we're here to collaborate. But I think, and we probably need clarity on this, that, YVHA owns, the property, and ultimately in terms of has that control with hopefully input and collaboration from kind of the city and the county and the other parties in terms of, needing to get what needs to be done in terms of being successful. So I think making sure that we, back to that, I guess, I see it as the stretch collaboration, right? From that perspective of it's going to take us all, but there are pieces that each party owns, and just the recognition of that. But that doesn't mean that we go forward without input from each of the other parties.
I think it's also sort of proof of concept at this point, where a very small annexation would hold that proof of concept for the community. I think if you're not talking those giant numbers and people envisioning what 2,000 units look like, I think you'd have a much easier time getting it through. It could even be a council vote versus going back to a referendum if it's small enough and you get enough community input up front. I think one of the things we always learn or always know in government is what's in it for me. And I think that's what the other 95% of the community that's not gonna be end users of that project wanna know. They wanna know what's in it for me. You know, is this development gonna cause me more traffic? Is it gonna cause me less traffic? So from that standpoint and collaborating, I think you know, if you come with a much smaller and keep the vision open, the rest of the vision for the property, I think you know, you can change it and scale it that way rather than trying to define the whole project again on day one. And, you know, I like to say I'm not a macroeconomic guy, but I mean, we also have to look at that sort of trend of where we are in this growth cycle and what that's going to look like, and making these giant commitments right now, you know, at this time is in my mind pretty hard and probably pretty careless.
Just to follow up on your point, if I can, really from the perspective of, I think one of the big issues last time around was that we weren't, I know you're gonna hear, you can count how many times I'm gonna say transparent and accountable, right? Because I think we weren't transparent enough, right? In the sense of, just how some of the decisions, and I would say I'm saying we as city council, right? I mean, in the BRAC process, I mean, and so even though the attempt was to do that and to be there, right? I mean, in the sense of, I mean, you know, just we need to crack that code from my perspective, you know, and I think it's been more challenging today than it was, you know, however many years ago, in the sense of making sure we get the community engaged and keep them engaged and understanding of what decisions are being made, what is going to be the impact, because you know, we got to that point before the vote where there was just so much misinformation out there that, you know, it's easier to say no. I mean, in terms of this is potentially how it's going to impact me, whether that was true or not, right? There was a lot of concern. And so, as I say, that's just from my perspective, really important that we definitely have our finger on the pulse and make sure that we have the people engaged all the way down the way, however we do that.
Yeah, if you start small, you can also use developers that are known to the area, those types of things, that have relationships, that have built product that's in our area that people would understand. I think there's, you know, yes, there's a lot of misinformation on both sides. If you haven't guessed, I was on the vote no side, but it was because of the scale and the unknowns. I mean, the financial information wasn't accessible. You know, nobody could figure out what the cost was going to be, how it was going to trickle down. And the message was that it was going to cost the taxpayer nothing. And that doesn't exist in this world.
So as you're talking, part of what I'm hearing is your desire for the next vision of what this planning process looks like. And I would take us one step back in this process. We'd get to that a little bit down the line in this process, but we'd start is, what does the table need to look like, basically, to decide questions like that, right? Generally, what I've heard is some sort of scaled down version that we think through another version of the plan. But we need to figure out what is the collaborative table that helps set that agenda in some ways, which is, I think, what the purpose of the first step of this group would be. So number of things. To create, like, okay, what's our next version of things? To clarify where we have role overlaps, or we want to be consulted or involved in different decisions, where there's separation between these things. And then this next piece of, like, how do we ensure communication and transparency across the process? And this process would basically just lay it out so that you all, as stakeholders in this, get a chance to co-design that together.
I think one of the things, if I'm right, in our debrief yesterday that I thought we were going to kind of bring up early on, was that we don't want governance. The city, from the city perspective, is we're not here to take over the governance of Brown Ranch. That's not right. I mean, that's what we discussed. It's like we we want to be part of the planning process, but not the governance process, if that makes sense. You know, and I think that goes to your point is like, what governance are we actually talking about? I think maybe we thought, or I thought coming in, our role was gonna be basically to be a steering body that made decisions to put forth, then the governance and the structure that exists already in YVHA would take those decisions that this group made and run with those, knowing that everybody had buy-in as to what the template, at least for the next development, was gonna look like. But not that it was gonna be our oversight or governance in the project. Is that right?
I struggle a little bit with, I mean, I think we're back to what governance.
Well, I think what Dave is saying is, to answer your original question, what did we envision when we walked in this room? We envisioned a collaborative planning process to have this group make decisions between now and annexation. At that point, we're not even talking about all these other things that all these case studies did, which was
Right.
a governance structure of implementation. That's not even on the table yet. I think it's way premature to talk about those types of things. So that was always my envision was, listen, we've got to get together as a group and collaborate on how do we move forward with an annexation process. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made collaboratively that are rooted in community engagement and community values. So yes, this body can make decisions, but to Gail's point, every time there's sort of a decision, it's got to be taken out to the community in some fashion and get feedback. Because none of these decisions are going to be easy. You're not going to hear from John Schneider that you can build 400 units. You're going to hear, if you build 400 units, these are the impacts to the community, and community, you need to decide if you're willing to live with those impacts. That goes for water, traffic, transit, you name it. Community design, all of those decisions. And then this body is the one that sort of helps shepherd that community engagement and decision-making process forward. That's sort of what I envisioned. And at that point, the city's out of it, other than sort of the regulatory role that we play in approving the project.
So just to clarify, from your perspective, this group becomes basically like steering committee 2.0.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
to a certain degree.
Steering committee 2.0.
What's Siri?
Is that an agreement?
Just don't say Siri.
Okay. That is helpful for my perspective for clarifying things, because my understanding as the facilitator that this was a transitional group to define what steering committee 2.0 or whatever that needed to looked like. But this was a transitional group that would help figure that out. And then some of you may be parts of that group. But I don't know if we know enough to know that this is exactly who needs to be at that table. So I almost saw this as a little bit of a design to this.
I'm just sharing what we thought.
Yeah. And this is me taking off my facilitator hat for a second to just add my story into the room so that we can get clear on things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I am comfortable that we have the right people here. Although respectfully, I would request Angelica be part of the representation of the county. I trust her without question. And she can separate herself from the YVHA easily. She's smart, she's articulate, she's very friendly up there. And that would give county two people, figure 3 people between YVHA and the city. 3B.
I mean, I don't I'm not gonna, it's up to the county who they.
Yeah, no.
I don't think the city really has a preference, but, and if this becomes the steering committee, that's where this sort of conversation of governance comes in. Because there still are going to be really, really difficult, sticky decisions that need to be made that we may not agree on.
Right.
And that's where the sort of this discussion of how do we make those decisions comes in.
And I think this group, though.
Real quick, Lou, I saw Jason
Sergeants.
in the waiting. Do you want to jump in?
No, Luke, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, you're on
on.
a roll. Yeah.
I think we know what a lot of those decisions are today. I mean, I could go
Decisions that need to
through
be made.
Pardon?
The decisions that need to.
that need to be made.
Yeah.
You know, I could look at the quote opposition manifesto. I think you were a signatory.
So they're a manifesto.
Oh, yeah, that's a manifesto. I have it. And, those were the points of contention. You know, it's too big. Okay, there was a funding gap, not true, but that's a different story for a different day. You know, traffic is gonna be a nightmare. You know, and somewhere in there is, we really wanna see a grocery store on the west side. You know, I mean, so it runs the gamut, there must be 100 questions.
Mhm.
And I could easily see us coming to closure on those questions.
Easily?
I can, well, you know, come on.
Which we.
Yeah, we as the
Define
group,
easily.
I talk at a corporate.
Yeah, so if you could go to the slide where it has like kind of the ownership.
Yeah.
Sec.
You wanted this one?
Yeah,
or-
yeah,
Yep,
exactly,
okay.
exactly. When I went into this, I was wondering if there was like some concept of like delegating some of that ownership to this new group. Seems like that's not necessarily the case. But I guess the point being is that like, these decision frameworks are effectively like the arena that we have to live within, right? Like, the city has control over land use. It's just the way it is, and they have control over annexation. And ultimately the community members are the ones who likely will need to vote on an annexation. And so, this group, I think, should be tasked with identifying options, preferred options, YVHA's option, city's option, whatever it might be, that can address these major issues. You're right, Tom. Like, there's going to be scenarios where cities like, no, this is the way it's got to be. We're like, we definitely don't agree with that. We've been down that road before. The ultimate arbiter of that is the community. And so, you know, I think it's incumbent upon us to create a group. I think we've got a good start here. I think that people from all of those different groups need to have some stake in that steering committee. Especially given the fact that like the Steamboat Springs community might be the ultimate decision maker here. Like, we could all be totally aligned, and if the community says, no, we don't like this, then it doesn't matter.
I mean, we have enough input at this point, not to beat the dead horse, but we have enough input from the community to at least know what they would accept.
I think we're honing in, but we're certainly not precise yet. And so as we go through and talk about the potential solutions to these, I think we need more community input.
Absolutely.
To say like, okay, we got 3 options in front of us. All of them have pros and cons. Community, how do you want to go down? Which road do you want to go down? Because there's no like, oh, we can build and grow and there'll be no traffic impacts. There'll be no impacts on water and the city will be completely fine financially. Like, there's not like a rose garden scenario that, and so it's, maybe the rose garden might be a bad.
Yes.
Tear it down.
Ballroom.
But anyhow, I just think that I think we're getting somewhere in the concept of creating a group that then can recommend out to the decision makers, whoever they are, city, YVHA, or the community at large, what the options are, and create an environment where we can collectively say yes. Because you need 3 things to get this done. We need land, we got land. We need money, we got money. We need community will. And that's what the task of this is generating the will from the community to say, yes, we want to do this. And off we go.
I mean, the only comment I would make to that is adding people to this group of Helen, is I'm not sure that that reaches the community. That's part of an outreach program. You know, it's, you know, input is one thing, but, you know, outreach is where everybody is hearing the same story from different parties. And I don't know that that is part of this group, or is that something else?
Isn't the first part to come up with the vision, rough vision of what A can be done with the constraints, B with financing, what's feasible, and then honing it in and putting those results out to the community, rather than asking the community, which is so hard to engage. I mean, politically, engage on any topic just to get the input for that vision. I mean, I feel like you guys know what could be feasibly built there. We have an idea of what the community wants. You know, wouldn't it be better for us to back of the napkin, come up with some options and then put it out to the community for review and input, rather than trying to get more input up front?
I don't know that we necessarily need more input up front. I would agree with you. But I think we've got to bring the community along with us in our decision-making process. That's why I put collaboration as number one in our values. Transparency was number two, because we have to be fully transparent. I agree, we probably need to come up with some scenarios, but why we came up with those scenarios, how we came up with those scenarios needs to be very clearly articulated and communicated. And then that gets taken out to the community, get that feedback. And then in terms of adding more people to this room, my third value was expertise, because we can't make these decisions. We don't have the expertise to make these decisions, but we have a whole bunch of folks that can help us make those decisions, and they've got to be brought in and consulted with to help us make those decisions. And that's why that expertise is going to be critical. And we're going to have to throw resources at it, right? We're going to have to hire some consultants to do the land planning plan. We're going to have to probably hire some folks to do some financing analysis for us. I mean,
But do we have to do that before we get it to an annexation vote?
I think in some respects you do, yes, because it's got to be grounded in reality.
Yeah. No, that's why I talked about John Snyder being part of this. Now, whether it's John or somebody else.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here representing the entire expertise of the city, so
Okay.
they're all part of this process.
Okay.
Kathy, you've been quiet for a long time.
I have been,
What are you noodling on?
I'm gonna take us back to yesterday a little bit. When I heard that we were gonna talk about governance, to me, that's a code word for control. And if that is not the intent of the city, then I think it would be very helpful upfront to say, we will control the things that we have direct decision making, but we are not trying to go beyond that and duplicate the housing authority. I want to be candid and I want to be straightforward. So I think if we can take that off the table, I will be much more comfortable. I mean, not take it off the table, but get an acknowledgement that that is the intent. And you have my undivided energy towards solving what I think is the key problem, and that is delivering housing to our community. I don't want us to lose vision, because if what we do ends up not delivering housing, then one, I think we have disrespected the donor intent, and I said that yesterday. And I think we can collaborate. That's why we're here. If there wasn't an interest in the collaboration. Transparency, you know, that means, you know, I don't know what that really means. It means it's overused. Does that mean every decision is, you know, a vote? I don't think so. It means that we provide an opportunity for people to understand what our decision is. So enough said there, but I really think that's the 800-pound gorilla. If we can get that established, I think that changes the whole tone of our meeting here.
Can I ask a clarifying question from just really quickly to that? Which is, was the concern you were sharing one of who has control or what the ultimate outcome is? Because those are 2 points you mentioned. One was the question of who is ultimately sort of making decisions or responsible for this asset and how it's developed. And then the other was, from what I understood, sort of a concern about staying focused on the mission of providing affordable homes on that site. And I'm just curious if which of those, or was it both of those concerns that you were referring to? Do you see what I'm asking?
Are you asking what's more important?
No, I'm asking because there were two elements of your comment. One was around, I think you really were spot on that part of this, when you talk about governance, you are talking about power and control and who is pulling the strings ultimately, like who's making the final decisions, and who's delivering whatever's going to be there. And then you were also speaking to, and I'm sorry, I'm fighting a cold, everybody, so I'm not able to speak as well as I'd like. But then the other was around a concern of not being able to be certain that whatever happens there is going to result in substantive, significant level of affordability, like what the intent of the property was for. Because those are two important ideas that are related potentially, but I think one has to do with an outcome and one has to do with governance.
Is there a question there?
Does somebody want to try to restate the question I'm asking if they understand it? I mean, really what I'm asking is you brought up both of those. Which is the primary concern, or are you looking at them as interwoven?
I think what you're trying to say is that both of them are essentially threshold items for the housing authority. The number one goal for us is delivering housing on that property. 100%. When we came into this, the term governance felt like we were being asked to give up some decision-making authority on a piece of property that we own. What's up?
You are being asked that.
Okay, we're gonna come back here. You finish your thought and then we're gonna clarify on this.
Yeah, because it's I guess tell me more.
I mean, I think that that was one of the fundamental problems that we had in the original go around, was that your number one goal was delivering housing and our number one goal was delivering community. And they were diametrically opposed. So at some level, I think there needs to be some relinquishment of control to say, we want to agree to collaborate for the outcome that is best suited for the community. It will absolutely include affordable housing. It may have to include commercial and market rate housing. That is not your mission. And that will be a problem. And that we're gonna have to talk through that. And I think ultimately you will have to relinquish some control of decision. And that's why I said the hard decisions are gonna be made in here. They can't be made 100% by the housing authority in terms of what ultimately is made out there. Because ultimately it's not your decision, it's the community's decision. So that's why I say you probably will have to give up some control. And that's why this body is the decision-making body about what ultimately ends up there, not just the housing authority.
Can you clarify what you mean by delivering community?
I think that there was such a focus on affordable housing that there wasn't as much of a focus on what is the ultimate character and community of that place. And that was one of the reasons a lot of people voted against it. It didn't feel like Steamboat. It didn't feel like a natural extension of our community. And so there needs to be a greater mix of uses. There needs to be a greater sense of place. And a greater sense of how does it extend the character of Steamboat. And so that's what I mean. It needs to feel like it was a natural, organic extension of our community.
Does what Tom is saying feel like a loss of control? Like you're giving up things?
I mean, what I'm hearing from Tom is that the city is the harborer of the sense of community. They're the gatekeeper of community. And I don't necessarily understand that.
I'm not saying we are, I'm saying collectively we need to be, and that has to be one of the primary focuses of our vision of this property.
I put it a lot more simply, which is what's in it for me. And that's what the community wants to buy in. That may not be part of your mission either. But, and I understand the argument that the doctors and the lawyers and the doctors and the nurses and the teachers are gonna live in the community, and that's what's, gonna be the added benefit to the people that are living outside of the development. But that's not a saleable item. I mean, for some people it is. I going to the grocery store and finding a parking spot, I think is more paramount in people's minds than it is about the fact that they provided housing for. And I mean, you can call me selfish in that, but I think that's more reality than. And so to hold that it's gonna be 100% affordable housing out there, or with a very little bit of market rate, I think is hard for people to understand. I think they showed that at the voting poll. And so designing something that we can sell as a community is, and truly will make their lives, the rest of the community, the other 95% that will live outside of Brown Ranch, will make their lives better.
Which is not altogether different from what I heard you saying around ultimately it's about community will, about what's gonna be feasible at this site. I think one of the things that's getting explicit here is that to move into collaboration in a shared group like this would mean that the overall vision for the site would be shared amongst these partners and not solely defined by YVHA. And to be clear on whether or not that feels like a loss of control and something that you'd be willing to do to come to the table with others.
Could I just
Yeah.
insert one thing? I think we're focusing a little too much on control, because really what happened last time was the control was lost when the negotiations started happening. So if we can preempt that and have those discussions up front, it's not a control issue, it's a collaborative process of saying, this is what we think works with input from the community, as opposed to, here's the plan, let's negotiate out the annexation agreement. The annexation agreement, I've probably done 10 or 15 of them over the years, has never gone through a public negotiation process that I've been involved in, other than maybe 3 or 4 key points. All the other details should be arranged up front at the staff level. It's a legal process, even though it's a legislative process, it's a legal process. And there should only be 2 or 3, 4 points which are decision-making or a debate at the end. So if we can get that down to maybe 1 or 2 points, which has to be debated after it goes through whatever internal process we're setting up here, we're facilitating the process, we're moving it forward, and we're having the key stakeholders. And the last comment is, when you look back at the previous effort, it wasn't, I think what got kind of lost in that, and we kept saying it on our discussions at the county levels, we are the housing authority. We appoint the members. We establish it by IGA, meaning the county and city. We've got to respect what we put together. I know there's some discussions, and rightfully so, does the makeup change and what do we modify on that? But how we build on what we have in place, which has successfully developed a fair amount of units in a relatively short period of time, and bring it to something which the community can accept and serves the community. Our failure will be is we come up with something which just gets roasted at the polls again. You know, that would then be on us working on this process.
I mean, fundamentally, is the concept of collaboration. Wresting control to the group. That is what collaboration is. Whether it's through consensus or voting or however you want to do it, that is the essence of collaboration. Is to give up some control over something. Or whether it's, you know, a community or whether it's affordable housing and geez, we have market sector housing in there. I've heard a lot of people tell me the healthiest communities are going to be those that have mixed use, you know, market sector and affordable living next to each other in the same. And I think one of the examples had that, the 994 unit, whatever it was. So I don't think we can argue about where the control levers are, because I don't know that we know what all of the points of discussion are at this point in time. But I think this group can identify those points of discussion. And then we can, you know, argue back and forth or do whatever we do in a collaborative fashion and come up with an answer.
Well, and just to build on Jay's point and maybe to address your question, Kathy, I mean, again, right, we have a housing authority, exactly as Jay has said, right? It's an intergovernmental agreement between the city and it's the county. I don't think that, and again, right, in this room is that I don't believe that there is any intention to say that we're creating some additional housing authority within the city or in any other capacity to be over Brown Ranch or the development of Brown Ranch, right? I mean, that's not what the city, I don't think that's what we're trying to say. So if there's concern with that, let's just get that off the table kind of right now. I do go back to kind of what you said, and when we look at the slides that have been presented, it is that stretch, right? Collaboration, right? From the perspective that it's gonna be a give and take, in the sense that we, you know, work through these in terms of what are these trade-offs, and that's where I think we go to the community from the perspective too of different scenarios, and these are potentially the trade-offs, right? I mean, from the, when we get down to what the costs are, I mean, so we know what the issues were from the last time and get that input. And I mean, I know, you know, and from my perspective, transparency means no executive sessions at city council, right? I mean, this is all done out in the open and in public, and we have these conversations. And so it's very clear in terms of what are the goals, what problems are we trying to solve, and what are the trade-offs.
So I'm gonna go here and then I'm gonna summarize what I'm hearing so far and then give us a quick break.
You know, looking back at West Steamboat neighborhood, that was all done in open session. And it took a long time. It took almost 3 years, but that was not necessarily the fault of the city or whatever. It just was, it is what it was. And there was input by staff, and they would present their findings to the council, but in open session. And you knew where you stood with the council. I think that's something that if the city's willing to commit to that, there's gotta be a way to shorten the 3 years. That's not acceptable. But we have, and then that plan, which was much smaller, which was widely accepted and was voted on. The only reason it didn't happen is they didn't have control of the land. That's the one thing we have here that is different. And site control is, I mean, you can't get a grant unless you have site control. So I mean, it's a fundamental thing that we have as a plus, we're going forward. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, no apologies needed. Okay, so, here's what I'm hearing so far. The purpose that's laid out here was overly broad for what folks were coming in thinking we were doing. What I'm hearing right now is this group is a starter version of a steering committee for the next round of planning. But there are, I think, 4 things that this group needs to decide on to understand the final version of what this steering committee looks like, which includes who needs to be at the table, how do we make decisions, how do we engage the community, and how do we communicate openly about what we're doing. Those feel like the 4 kind of design pieces that are coming up right now about how we would work together. So the first task of this group is would be to settle those 4 questions, assuming this is a starter steering committee. Then the next piece of this process would be, which we've already started jumping into, outlining the steps that we need to tackle to annexation. And that would include figuring out when community gets engaged, whether that's on scenario planning or whatnot. What are the key studies? What needs to happen before or after annexation? What's the target goal line? So we define what it means to say this is a scaled down version, what it means in terms of community, that type of thing. That's the next piece. So it's similar to what we started you off with, but that was too broad. What I'd like to do is take a moment to, I know I verbally said a lot of things just now, like to take a break, give me a chance to go to the bathroom. And also, I'll rewrite that on a slide and we can check in to see how close that is. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, we're gonna come back in 10 minutes, which means 10:16.
Sounds good.
Apologies, folks, my Wi-Fi just ended, so I'm gonna reconnect here. I had just asked the group to consider this updated list of purpose and objectives for this group. And wanted to get a fist of 5 on whether or not they commit to a process in which we do these things together over the next 2 to 3 meetings.
Can you go over what the 5 is again,
Yeah,
or 6? Okay.
We were 5, because we only have one.
you only have 5 fingers.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Come back.
Maybe. I don't know, I'm counting 6 there, just.
There we go. It
is 6 if you count 0.
took me a long time to understand, was that a right-handed person or a left-handed person? And I think it's a left-handed person looking at us.
Yes.
I think that's what it is. That's how my mind works.
So this would be, I look at that statement of purpose and I strongly support that this is the direction we need to go in as a group. 3 is like, I'm comfortable with this. I have some concerns about where we're going forward, but I'm okay with it. Strong reservations, but would support the decision. I like to get us to 3 and above for consensus stuff.
Do we do like 1, 2, 3, go?
Yeah.
You go
Or
first.
do you wanna go back? Yeah, go back.
Do you want me to go back to the purpose slide? Okay, so now you've got your fingers in mind. And I'm gonna come back to this slide. All right, 1, 2, nope, wrong one. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now we come back and I go first to anyone who's below a 3 and I say, what would bring you up to a 5? What would make you support this process more?
More clarity.
And tell me what you mean by that.
To me, it's still a bit, somewhat vague,
Okay,
so. And, I am not, I need a little bit, as Scott Ford used to say, white space before I go to a 3, because that means I'm all in.
what does white space mean?
Place to think,
Okay, you need processing.
yes,
Okay.
processing time.
Is there any one of these items that feels more or less clear?
I think decision-making is something that needs to be clarified.
Okay.
Isn't
That's what we're doing, right?
one of the things we're gonna talk about?
That's what
That's
what's stated in here is that we would need to figure out, that's a task of this group is to figure out decision making.
Got it.
That's what we would have to do, along with those other 3 items. We'd have to figure out final membership, how we make decisions, how and if we do community engagement, and how we communicate what we're working on. Those would be the sort of like set of 4 governance questions we have to figure out about how the group operates.
We can do that by noon.
If we decide that this is a
a lot of
enough of a place to move forward, then this is where I'd like to go next. And then the next 2 meetings would be focused on defining our end goal for a future annexation proposal. And thinking about what's the final state we want to get to, and then thinking about what are the steps needed to get to that. That would be this process, and then we'd start doing all of that together.
All right, I'll go to a 3.
Okay.
She's easy. You're easy.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Okay, So now our task for the rest of our time is to go through these other items. So I want to start off with a conversation about membership. We're gonna go through a similar process. We'll have a discussion about it. I'll go ahead and paraphrase what I'm hearing for the group and we'll go to another consensus decision. Okay, so far what I've heard as some pieces around membership is that Angelica is a desired member of the group. I've heard some potential to think about representatives from the community. And then there was a piece of are there other stakeholders that need to get involved? So open up for discussion. What do you feel like needs to be true for membership? Yeah.
I'll start. I think that we need to have a conversation around the role of staff. Just how staff works in this group. As Tom mentioned, represents the city, but bringing in additional staff from the city from time to time, or maybe always. So I think that's one part of membership that we need to discuss. And then I don't necessarily think that this is the right group and that we need to have a discussion around including more people. I appreciated the conversation that we had earlier about whether we have done enough community engagement to get to this point, and maybe we need to have some options to bring to the community to give the community something to react to. And if that's the case, then it feels like this group needs to have additional expertise. So whether that's expertise that comes from community representation or something else, I do think that we should have a discussion about changing the composition of this group a bit.
Okay. Real quick, I've got a couple probing questions here. What do you think is the ideal role of staff for this group? What would be your ideal composition?
I don't know if I'm ready to answer that, like
Okay.
when it comes, because I think that also has to do with decision making. Those two things are intertwined, but the conversation that I think we should have is staff purely here to provide expertise, or does staff have a kind of equal sort of vote within this group? And then how does this group have decision making when it comes to the kind of broader groups that the city and the county and YVHA?
Okay. And then my next probing question is on expertise. What type of expertise do you think needs to be represented here?
Well, if we are going to be working through different options for community development plan and what could be included in an annexation agreement, then I think there needs to be expertise on both the development side, which is certainly multifaceted in terms of just cost on the earthwork side, infrastructure, vertical development, so development expertise, and then also operations isn't quite the correct word, but just delivery of city services and kind of broader community impact. I think we need quite a bit of additional expertise.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just gonna throw out the idea when this kind of came up originally. I mean, is it like maybe in an advisory group? I mean, you really like have different advisory groups as opposed to people actually on the board, but you have, to the extent that the expertise is going to depend, right? Or various different pieces and parts of this, some sort of advisory group, or, I loved from one of the examples kind of, and then maybe it's a community advisory group. So you've got an expert, a group of experts, and then you've got specific community engagement. I mean, those were just kind of in terms of trying to think about how this might work. In terms of who you populate around the table and bring in those experts, or somehow have a formal structure to integrate that into the conversation and decision making.
I would agree with that. I think decision making is better. Smaller groups are better at making decisions. I think if you involve the community, the question is, what part of the community are you involving? I don't know that we could define different members of the community. And the theory, I think at one time on the DST was these people would be ambassadors and they would go out in the community and sell the project. I don't see that working, honestly. I think there has to be a separate outreach program that keeps the community involved and informed. So, I mean, that's my sense, and I think, I like the idea of bringing in experts as needed for whatever specific task, and honestly, this, defining the end goal for unit annexation proposal, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it could easily be, let's develop neighborhood sites A and B. How many units do you think can get there, that kind of stuff?
I'm gonna hold us off on that, cause that's
Sure.
gonna be in future meetings.
Okay, no, and that's,
We're just gonna start with the 4 items, the membership,
Okay.
decision making, yeah.
that's my discussion on membership.
That's my dedication to efficiency is keeping
That's
us
it,
focused on
okay,
one chunk at a time. Okay, so other thoughts on membership? Would love to hear responses to thinking through maybe like the staff question, and then there's this piece of additional groups and community engagement.
I agree with Emily that, having staff come and present, especially when their specific topics are needed, whether it's public works or whether it's, through planning or traffic, having this come, but not being part of the decision-making process. So they're educating the table and the board, everybody hears the same things from those staffers, whether it's, county or YVHA or city staff would get called upon, but keeping the decision-making process tight.
Okay.
As far as role within community engagement, I think it's really easy to find out or to involve the biggest dissenters of the original project and the people that are the end users. I think it would be easy to put together a community advisory board with those folks. And I think they'd have more in common on a smaller scale, and I think they could present probably pretty good input and collaboration. And those voices that were dissenting were big voices, right? And so I think getting them to buy into the process is a big deal as well. But only an advisory
board.
only in and then if they don't engage and you reach out to those people, then that's their fault.
Okay, so when you say tight, give me numbers on how many staff from each entity should be involved, do you think?
I think as many as necessary for advisors, but I just don't think they'd be part of the voting process.
Okay, so for voting process, would you say 1, 2, how many, 3 staff?
I don't think any staff, I mean, I
No
think whatever
staff
this
voting.
board makeup ends up being,
Okay,
whether whoever is on it I thought that was kind of the point, is that you keep the board size small
Mhm.
with the stakeholders that are in there. We would be reporting back to city council, getting our input, they'd be reporting back to the county commissioners, they'd be reporting back to their own board and sort of all getting our own input and from those organizations, but then this small group would make the decisions.
okay.
And I did just want to underscore that point, right, is we ultimately need to make sure that we're keeping city council, the rest of the members of city council engaged. So, and so that's got to be kind of inherent in the process in terms of being able to make sure that we have the ability to get feedback and input, right, in a public forum so that we can come in here and try to represent those views.
Right,
As
we'd have
possible.
consensus with the council.
Right.
So that it wouldn't come back to a council meeting and then get shut down.
Mhm.
I mean, at least that would be the goal, right?
Right.
It was be the same on the board, from the board side.
Yeah, I think one of the things, we're kind of bleeding into the decision-making
Yeah.
Yes.
standpoint, but like, there probably needs to be kind of a formal understanding amongst the YVHA board, amongst the city council about like, who's their representative and what authority are they giving them to, to kind of make, quote unquote, make decisions. Because ultimately, these are all gonna have to go back to a full vote of the housing authority board and the city council. And so I don't think there's really a whole lot of like delegation of true authority other than like trying to be more efficient. In having just, instead of having like 20 people sitting in this room trying to work on it and having full representation of each board. So I think that would be like kind of a critical component, is like the really clear understanding once we get to the, like, who are the voting members? And then what's their charge from their respective kind of larger group that they represent. It may be the same thing with the community at large. I don't know how you do that necessarily. Seems almost impossible to say like community at large, you've now delegated to two people that.
Well, they're gonna have the ultimate vote.
Tom, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to talk about first and foremost, membership of this group. There was a suggestion that Angelica said in here. With all due respect to Angelica, optics make a big difference, and I don't think those are good optics, since she sits on the Housing Authority Board. So I'm not sure that is probably the best thing. That's just my own opinion. And then, obviously, we gotta talk about Emily, right? I mean, you have two staff members here. And why is that? So I just think that's a conversation. All due respect to Emily, but I think that's part of the makeup of this board, right? Is it four Housing Authority members, 3 and 1? Or I think that, again, that goes to optics.
So I wanna be really clear on this piece, that when I gave the directions to Brad, I said up to 3 staff from each
There's
group.
no blame in my
Okay,
comments. There's just comment that I think that needs to be talked about up front.
Absolutely, so the question is, and that's why I'm asking, how many staff? Do we have 2 staff, 1 staff? What do you think is the right mix? I'm hearing participate as a non-voting member.
I mean, anticipating having Elliot come back into the mix.
Let's clarify what you just said.
Yeah.
You're saying participate as a non-voting member? I was talking about voting members.
Okay, well, I was hearing earlier that in this conversation that only council and board members and staff would not have a vote.
Wasn't for me.
Okay, so we would have some staff who are included as voting members,
And that's what.
but a limited amount.
I think that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
I originally, my thinking, this is my personal thinking, is we had 3 representatives from the city, 3 from the board, 2 from the county,
Mhm.
and
3 total from,
those will be the voters.
can I say that again?
3 people, 2 council people, and the city manager. 2 board people, executive director, county exec, and the commissioner. And that balances it. I mean,
I would go back to the county having 1. The county's not gonna be involved in the final vote. It's a city vote. I mean, that's,
What's your thought on that, Jason?
I mean, I'm just thinking about Jay getting basically put in the middle of the city versus like.
I spent most of my life in the middle, but, I mean, I think from the county's perspective, in terms of our representation, we defer to the city and what they think would work best for them, because I do acknowledge our partnership is at a different level. And I think we bring some, if it's just me, we would keep the board, as I mentioned, up to date on what's going on in a public fashion on a regular basis. Which is why it's also important not to have executive session type meetings on stuff like this. We want to be as transparent on our side, but I would defer what works best. I don't think we're here to drive the process. I think we're here to help support it and try to move the project forward.
And are you comfortable with that?
I don't really have a choice, so no,
You bring a lot of expertise to
I
the
mean,
table in terms of your, not
Yeah.
just in terms of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all, as long as everyone at the table has a common goal that we want success on this, which is what I'm hearing. The makeup to me isn't as important, on the voting side, because hopefully we don't have many split votes as this moves forward.
Mhm.
And as a bureaucrat, it's pretty rare ever to get to vote on anything, so I get kind of excited about the chance to go on, so. Oh, yeah.
Aaron's personal victory.
I'm just kidding.
Sounds like you're a 5 on that.
So to clarify, are you comfortable with just 1 staff member? I know you've expressed concerns about commissioner capacity to engage in this. But I know you've also heard from this group that there feels like maybe there's an importance to it as well. Where are you landing on that question right now?
If you're asking me if I'm okay, 1 versus 2,
Mhm.
I don't think that's a critical issue for us. I think, as I mentioned, if the goal is, I don't see myself, if I'm in the role of having to be a deciding vote on something, there's something wrong with the process, and we're gonna have to take a time out and go, okay, we need to rebase a little bit on this, and I will push that if we're split with the county being a divided vote, there's other problems going on.
That gets the decision making.
Yes.
So I agree with you.
Okay, all right, so far we have a proposal to basically have 2 YVHA board plus 1 staff, 2 city council plus 1 staff, 1 staff from the county. Okay, go ahead and give me a fist of 5 on that in terms of membership. Okay,
Are you not voting?
are you up?
You can put
But
0.
we haven't gone to that decision making. Right now, everything is by consensus because nothing is determined. So I want your vote to be in there. If that is something that, as your perspective, you're saying, no, I don't think it's sufficient to have 1 staff member, then I think that needs to be brought into this room.
I don't think that we had. I don't know, I'm just gonna abstain from voting at this point on that one.
Emily, this is your exit ramp.
Ron, we do want to. It's valued.
But I
Let me
mean,
give you
Jason, do
some
you
white
want
space on
Elliot to
this.
be on? I mean.
No, I think that the approach of having staff provide expertise. I mean, interestingly enough, this is looking very much like BRAC plus J. So BRAC J.
Brackish.
Yeah, brackish. Slightly Selenic. Anyhow, but ultimately, we're not talking about an annexation proposal. We are essentially co-creating design for the project. So I mean, I think the representation works. I wonder, I'd like to know more about community engagement because I feel like that's going to be really important. Because I sat in this room for 1.5 years with Jim and Wilkins sitting over there scoffing at every statement that was made. And so like, how do we bring that in?
And I think we also, I can't speak obviously for housing authority staff, but we have to consider staff capacity. I heard advisory committees or working groups. My staff does not have the capacity to spend a lot of time on working groups and advisory committees, working through scenario planning and do everything else that they're being asked to do this year. So that we have to talk about that in terms of what that looks like with respect to this process.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to build off of that we are gonna be looking at outside expertise. What process we use to bring them in, who they are, and how we pay for them.
Yeah.
Because we are upfront gonna be dealing with probably some more limited resources.
Yeah.
On how we move forward. DOLA's not gonna just write a big check for us to bring consultants on to help with the process. So just that's one we'll have to figure out a little bit as we move forward. And some of the city's funds have constraints on how they're used towards elements of this project, probably for the planning process.
Yeah, the financial landscape is definitely different than it was last time around.
All right, so I want to bring in the conversation about both staff, expertise and community engagement. Do we want to go there next or decision making?
I thought we did decision making.
How are we making decisions?
We were gonna vote.
Well, and is membership settled? Like, Cause I also brought up the issue of bringing additional expertise onto the group or broader community representation, and I don't think that we actually discussed that.
Okay, so that's where, I want your vote in this because you're bringing in a perspective that says, I don't think we've addressed everything in that decision. When I paraphrase a decision to the group, that's our opportunity to say, nope, we haven't discussed everything. So I'm gonna stick on membership for a second here. And bring this question into the room. Are there any external, stakeholders who need to be in membership? This.
Well, I had mentioned just the need for additional expertise in a lot of different ways, and so if that comes through advising and presenting as needed, that's one way to approach it. Or to have people with additional expertise and or just broader community representation also being a part of the voting group. I think those are two different questions.
Okay.
I agree, and I think that the expertise, because there's so many different facets of expertise that we're gonna need, there's no way to sort of have them sit at the table. That I think we need to bring them in a sort of an advisory. And when we have questions or issues that we're grappling with, that's when they would come in and advise this group, but not necessarily be the decision makers. That's my thinking about that, to get at what you're saying. I always expected that we're gonna have to bring in folks to help, or utilize folks and help advise us in terms of making some of these decisions.
I agree. I agree.
Absolutely.
I
Take
think
it, oh,
what the DST did in terms of those special meetings.
Mhm.
You know, let's talk about soils or let's talk about this. And then having like a roundtable discussion about a specific issue we want to deal with
Mhm.
was probably the most productive part of what the DST did, in my view.
Mhm. Okay, so you'd want something similar to that where we like weigh in with an expert and bring in some community members as well to get their thoughts on particular technical element of things.
Jay, in the annexations that you've done, has anybody ever, do they ever put forth the entitlements with the annexation without the whole plan being done?
It depends, but sometimes, yes, sometimes it'll be raw land and you're just assigning zoning. That is a fairly common approach to annexations versus a fully property with full entitlements to it. As part of the process. So, I mean, the one thing about the annexation process is it's the one thing that the city can do where they have total latitude on how to approach it and don't have to follow codes to a T. They have a lot of latitude on how what you can negotiate into an annexation agreement. It's where you can do real estate transfer fees. It's where you can do certain things to make the project viable long term and minimize impacts to the city.
So would we be better off, could we be better off having this group defining the general, the proof of concept scope of a small annexation and trying to go with the entitlements and that's all that can be built, but then we're not gonna master plan it and bringing that annexation forward and then letting, then this group's work would be done and it would go to the people that are gonna develop the project.
And that's obviously a decision for, the city if that's their desire, but it is not, you can do that.
I mean, would that be a faster process to get a proof of concept out and to deliver affordable housing to the community? Knowing that, I mean, we know what the constraints are, so do we take half that constraint? That would be the minutia of it. But, could we put forth that sort of scope with the entitlements that we all agree on in this group and bring the annexation forward and then let all the expertise and all the other things come after the annexation is done?
It's really what the community would accept is,
Yeah.
defer to the city.
But if they knew what the limits were, right? This project cannot exceed 200 units. This project is going to be made up of, this makeup of those units. I'm just trying to figure out without having to go through all of the technical expertise and planning and then, be at the end of the road and somebody doesn't like it or we pull out or this, that, if you got the entitlements in there, then the real planning could start and move forward. That's all my thing.
I think the answer to your question is technically yes, you could you could move forward, like the city could take up an ordinance tomorrow to annex the land with very limited, like there's statutory requirements, but there's, you know, it's a scope of about this big, whereas what we've traditionally done is this massive scope, right, of trying to address nearly every potential impact and have some type of concept of a solution or a firm solution figured out for all of it. And so there's space in between both of those to figure out where the right thing is. And I believe the concept is this group, whatever the composition ends up being, will be the ones to sort of fine tune that.
Exactly.
And it's likely a function of what Jay was saying. What's the community going to be comfortable with, right? If it's of a small enough scope, they're like, you know, don't worry about water, right? We're pretty good on water. Okay. I thought sounds great. But there may be some concerns that people really want to know a lot about. This community tends to want to know nearly every detail before making a decision.
Yeah, I've been involved in projects where the raw land had been annexed decades earlier, and then the development plan went through numerous initiatives because it was questioned by the public, because that final ordinance was subject to initiative. And I believe your charter has a similar element in it. So if you were to annex it with just kind of parameters on it, it doesn't mean that the public doesn't get a chance to have a bite at the apple on the actual development plan. So
It's true. The question that,
Can I follow
yeah,
up?
please.
But probably there would be limitations, right? So from the perspective of, right, you move forward with the development plan, but there's gonna be, back to the community engagement piece of it, that there's gonna be questions, right, in terms of how does that get paid for, potentially, right?
Mhm.
I mean, so I guess what I'm trying to distinguish is, right? There's when you move into that whole development phase, there's less flexibility,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
That's
you
very
can
true.
build some of that into the agreement for the annexation,
Okay.
but you know, I'm not suggesting you customize zoning through an annexation agreement, but you can build in some of that flexibility there, which obligates the properties, is my understanding. The challenge of doing it early also is that you lose some of the items that you might want to cover in an annexation agreement, which would be running with the land, no matter what gets developed there. So there's pros and cons either way.
Okay.
So getting back to membership, I think the two remaining questions are community representation and I'm gonna maybe make it just a minor adjustment, is sort of implementation expertise.
Mhm. That's a good way to put it.
As it relates to like the decision-making team. And I say that because ultimately this is a project that needs to be feasible, viable. I don't have a suggestion of who that person could be, but there's some group, either the housing authority or some other person needs to represent just the viability of being able to do it. And then the second thing would be ultimately the community is the decision maker. How is that voice represented in this decision-making process? So that we don't get into sort of a city YVHA echo chamber and lose touch with the community at large, or maybe it's not just community representation, but voter representation.
I think adding a community member, you would have to decide what community member represents the community. Unless you wanted to add 10 community members. Or 20, I don't know how many different perspectives there are out there. So in my mind, having a community advisory board is a far more efficient way of doing things. We keep them informed, regular meetings. What do you guys think?
And could we use the DST for that?
I would think so. Although my biggest concern with the DST is whatever they did never really seeped completely into the community. You know, what they did good stuff. They all got together, they all collaborated to some degree. But, you know, the community at large doesn't know what happened.
From the people I talked to, they weren't really sure what they had accomplished.
Okay, so, man, yeah, okay.
So is it a kind of a two-step thing where you have this, let's just call it DST 2.0, the steering committee 2.0. And that there is some assigned representative from the DST that actually sits in these meetings.
You're counting on that person to disseminate information.
It'd be a job, there's no doubt. I'm
Yeah.
throwing ideas out here. I'm not saying this is a good idea.
I just think back to the first process, and I think that something that went well was the steering committee that YVHA put together, and it had 15 people. And I think it's entirely possible for a group of 15 people when they're well facilitated and we have the tools to make decisions. Like I think the FISTA 5 is a good tool to be able to make decisions. And it just thinking back to the values that we discussed yesterday, I can't remember where inclusion ranked in it, but it was mid to high. And I just think that we should look around the table and decide, like, is this really, like, is this the group, or are there people missing? And is there really harm in opening it up to a couple of other people from the broader community?
The only thing I would say on the DST or on the steering committee is seeking out original opposition. You know, I feel like. Well, and one of the differences in this process is there's a dissenter from the original project, a very avid dissenter that's sitting here and, you know, wants to solve the problem as well. And so I think that is a difference that the people that I came from in the community would feel some sort of representation, not that I should be the one to represent them, but that I feel the hardest thing with all the panels and things that went on is that the dissenters weren't part of it. And probably for their own fault, because they didn't want to engage. They weren't the end user, so they weren't part of the group that was really thrilled to see the whole thing going on. And like I said, it's an unpopular thing to come out against any affordable housing project. So I think that was a lot of where the no vote came from. But I think it would be easy to engage those folks. And in a smaller project like that, I think you would get total buy-in.
But the vehicle to do that, would that be an advisory committee or, you know, one or two people here voting? And my pretty strong view is, Mike McClarney said it. This was a coalition against Brown Ranch. And that coalition consisted of 5 groups, maybe. You know, probably the no growth group being the largest of all of those. They're just like, he actually had a number, he said 30 or 40% of the group. Was no growth. Yeah, I don't know. And then, you know, they had other dissenters. And somewhere I wrote a paper on who they were.
I think the fiscal hawks were the driving force behind it.
And the fiscal hawks, but you know, these are also the guys that thought there was a funding gap and it had nothing to do with Brown Ranch. You know,
I don't want to rehash that, but I'm, you know, I think they're easy. I think it's easy to put together that steering committee with representation from the community that would belay the fears that were.
You're talking about an advisory
committee.
Yeah, okay, no, that's what
That would,
I agree with that entirely.
that could report to this board.
Yeah, Tom. And then I saw you, Kathy, too, so.
I just wanna, you've mentioned a couple times having representation on this steering committee from the broader community. Who do you have in mind? Not individuals, but just sort of categories.
I do think it's important to have people with lived experience on this group
Well, we all have lived experience. What do you mean by that?
with housing insecurity.
And you don't think that you could represent that, the housing authority?
I think
I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
You can say no.
I don't think, I mean. We can represent it, but ourselves have not lived the types of housing insecurity that we're talking about. And that is impossible to sort of replicate. And so, I think from what you're saying, like, you know, Dave doesn't want to be the token dissenter, if you will. If we're gonna have representation, I think you list some categories of people. Lived experience being one, people who were, very much against the previous project, people who were very much for the previous project. And or whatever categories we want to define, and then go seek out those people to join the team. Whether that's the advisory committee or whether it's sitting here.
Well, that's what we're trying to decide.
Yeah.
But I hear Emily saying they need to be sitting here.
That's what I'm hearing from her.
So let's, I'm gonna have Kathy weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think having a advisory committee makes all the sense in the world. And that's where I think the variety of who is the community can lie. Because if you put one or two people on, you're gonna be criticized because you're not representing some other section of the community. You're picking winners. So I think it's the entities that are directly affected, the housing authority, the city and the county should be on the steering committee. And then the advisory committee would have a membership that would represent the people that were opposed and lived experience and be more, I mean, I think that is defensible.
So I think what I'm hearing is that we're proposing an advisory committee that would advise the steering committee that would recommend decisions to the decision-making bodies, which are ultimately YVHA is the landowner and the City of Steamboat Springs as the city that controls land use and annexation.
That's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh.
yeah, I'm not
Do you
sure I
think-
followed. I'm not sure I followed that. Well,
Advisory committee that advises this.
Steering committee.
right, okay. Well, okay, but I guess I was kind of confused with the decision making and the steering and the decision making committee and the steering committee I see as the same.
Yep, me too.
Yes,
Okay, so not three levels.
Well, I think, I
but
don't,
the advisory committee educates the steering committee, in my mind.
I think what Emily's saying though is that the decisions of this group are not final. We just cannot be I don't think that the city is, or the city or the housing authority can legally vest in this group the decision-making authority that we're talking about. Like, it's ultimately got to go back to your full membership and our full membership. So this steering committee is functionally a recommending body. They're doing a lot of work,
Right.
and they're likely having to make several small decisions and queuing up very big decisions.
But hopefully it would be in the spirit of not getting to that end vote and getting all the work shot down, right? We'd be
Agreed.
reporting back and forth to our boards, we'd be coming back to these meetings and then hashing out whatever other differences there were, and then when the final vote came, it would be a consensus vote. I mean, at least that's the way I would see it.
That's how I see it too, although to Jason's point, and I'll just bring this up again. Sounds very familiar. What we did before, we're doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
No, we're doing it in public.
And I also think the difference is the collaborative mentality did not exist. That was an adversarial negotiation from day one. And I would hope we don't go there, but I'll put it that way.
And the project is very much constrained.
Again, that goes to transparency, because I'm sure that we'll get questions about, this sounds like BRAC 2.0.
Right.
Why you expect a different result? So we just need to be clear on why we think the same setup is gonna result in something different.
I put it 100% on Jay.
So I would just, the difference is the details on the discussions are happening up front.
Yeah,
not
no,
after the plan's put together. So I think when it said, oh, it's BRAC 2.0, like, no, it's trying to avoid BRAC 2.0. It's trying to
Yeah.
get that input up front. So that's messaging which has to come from inside here.
We're bringing Jay out for beers this afternoon, the city is.
Well,
I guess I hear what Emily's saying, and I'm struggling with that point from the perspective of, I mean, I absolutely advocate for an advisory committee, right? I mean, in the sense of making sure that we have the disparate views represented. That and with them, the challenge being, again, they're coming to the table with the intent of, the end goal, agreement with hopefully agreement with the end goal and the stretch, collaboration that we need to give and take. I do think there's a lot of value in having the lived experience.
I mean, wouldn't it
At
be
the
beneficial with the advisory committee to have this whole board sit with them for 1 or 2 meetings?
Yeah,
And
but I
not
guess-
just have
yeah.
somebody report?
Yeah. Oh, I know, definitely. I guess I agree with that. I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of going back to none of us here have that lived experience. And I
Why
think
would you
that's
say that?
because who here doesn't own a home,
Well.
right?
Well,
Look in the car.
what about growing up?
Yeah, well, but I think it's different. I mean, I truly believe it's different. I truly believe that what this community is facing is so much different than when each one of us moved here, or even, I mean, even, I think when we grew up, right? I mean, to have the reality, I mean, and listen to what and again, there's a whole gamut too, right, of the lived experience. It's from,
Yeah, does it
the
have
home-
to be just here in Steamboat?
Well, I think I mean, I think it has to be in this valley from my perspective, right? I mean, again, going back to, the folks, I mean, as I say, it's the gamut, right?
Well, I would ask them one question, with the lived experience and with folks, how has the story changed in the last 3 years? Or what would the story change about what we physically have the ability to do? I'm not saying we should discount their stories, I'm just saying, what will those stories tell us that will help us direct what we're trying to accomplish here?
I think the one thing.
And then we'll go, can we go to Emily
Yeah,
real
sure.
quick and then Lou? Yeah.
My suggestion is that rather than having an advisory committee to advise a steering committee, I think that feels inefficient. And I also think it feels very disempowering for members of the advisory committee. It's like, what's the point? Why spend my time doing this? If I were a member of that personally. I think rather than having an advisory committee to advise the steering committee, who is the recommending body to the decision-making bodies, I would recommend just opening up the steering committee to say 15 people. Everyone here, or the groups that y'all discussed in terms of representation from YVHA, city and county, and then the remaining members. So I think that would be what, eight other people, which just represent the community, and it's not the expectation that 8 people are representing every single need and view and desire within the community, but at least you're getting kind of different voices from within the community. And they're empowered to like, be sitting at the table, rolling up their sleeves and discussing really challenging issues. I think like this project is so much harder than some people sort of reduce it down to. And they would be empowered to be like sitting alongside you all to make decisions.
Well, and then there's a difference between working on something and voting on something. Okay. My concern is very real concern. I can tell you the whole lived experience thing is gonna boil down to, my lived experience is, I'm in the 40% AMI range. Okay, I can't afford anything. My experience is I'm in the 100% AMI range, I can afford something. I'm in the 160% AMI range, and I'm a doctor and I'd really like to have a home here. Those are the lived experiences we're talking about. And that, so do you get like somebody from every AMI group? That's the perspectives that you're looking for, because I think it's a really broad range. between affordable housing and attainable housing and, those definitions. So to me, that makes it very difficult to manage that kind of an organization. That's, like I said, the expertise stuff is even very similar, although that's gonna be very specialized. And I think we have to have dedicated sessions to talk about specific issues.
So I can talk a little bit from the perspective of like the feasibility or like what it would look like to do that. So I think there's some improvements we could make with the DST selection. We used a tool called Panelot. That allowed us to create certain criteria of getting a certain amount of folks who were no votes, somewhat no votes, like uncertain no votes, purely neutral, somewhat yes, and full yes, right? So in that sense, it's a little bit, that's 5 groups, right? And we're talking about 8 members. But overall, the DST group that we got from selection was about 80 folks. And from those, there were different representations. There were far more in our initial pool who were pro Brown Ranch and who voted yes on it. So we adjusted the panel lot so as many people as we could were represented from folks who voted no on that. That being said, that's one piece of information out in the public that has not translated about how fair that process was. So if I did it again, I would say you need exactly 1, 1, 1, 1 from each of those 5 groups. Maybe you have 5 people come in as a group, or you bump that up to 10 and you have 17 total. That's my thought on what that would look like to be feasible.
I think it's also fair to say that all the work that was done on the first project with all the outrage and the people that have lived experience isn't being thrown out. Those lived experiences and that information that was collected during that process still will translate to the next process because it'll be represented by YVHA. Those are the folks that you guys were championing, right? And it's what the whole process is for. So I don't think that gets thrown away in this next process. I don't want to sound callous or dismissive of those folks, but I'm not sure the stories have changed that much going into this process.
I would
In
argue
3
they I would argue they have,
in 3 years.
You think they got more exacerbated?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely, and I think the data proves that, right, from the perspective of we're losing family, we're seeing a decline in the schools admission numbers. And I just think that that it's important to have that voice around the table. That elevates it.
I'm not saying eliminate him. I'm just saying I don't think it has to be weighted heavier than any other section.
Well, and I would say it's also, right, you listed it out, it's a various different,
AMI.
3 different AMI groups, but it's also then the other side of the coin in terms of the dissenters, right, whether it was because of growth or cost. So it's just, again, how do we get that voice so that it is part of these conversations? And I'm still struggling as to whether that's an actual vote or whether that's an advisory committee. I do think there's a benefit to having that.
There's no
room.
disagreement that we wanna have a group of community members
Involved.
Right,
So the question is the question is how.
exactly.
And I'll defer to Cale, but from a management standpoint, it's easier to have an advisory group. It's easier to have a decision-making group that's smaller than bigger.
And the vote has to come from a realistic perspective, not an idealistic perspective, because idealistic has nothing to do with finance.
Well, I guess I just wanna, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add my vision or what I was thinking of the folks at the table was the folks voting are the ones who are gonna be incurring the debt or the demands on their entities that they're representing. So whether it's the housing authority, the city, county at a much more modest level, but we were part of it. I mean, just think County Road 42 and the intersection that, will be incurring some obligations as part of whatever comes together. And so those who are going to be writing the checks, for lack of a better term, I think need to be the ones voting on it. And whatever system we put together to get input from the community should help support that. But the folks going aye are the ones who are putting their names on the financial obligations on this. So just.
I agree.
So do you see that in the sense of we have, let's say, 15 people around the table, but only 7 are voting?
I mean, I just wanted to throw that out. I don't have a vision for how that works, but my whole goal is, what I was getting at is we're trying to avoid the negotiation at the tail end and have that open discussion up front through the process. And that really takes those who are incurring the financial obligations to be there each step of the way, agreeing by consensus or voting, whatever, to get to the next step of the process.
I'm not purposefully disagreeing with that statement, but one of the final decision makers is likely the voting public. And so why not have them involved in making those decisions?
Because you have to identify the voting public.
Because you have 5 of them.
What else?
And you have 95% that are disengaged and won't know. I mean, if there's one thing I know from just the election is like trying to get people to even like, oh, there's an election.
And if we do community engagement and public outreach correctly, they are engaged.
Right.
To me, that's the biggest piece here is this community outreach.
Yeah. Clark, do you want to weigh in here? I see your hand's been raised for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Kale. I think where you guys were just going is pretty important. I think when we're talking about community engagement, it's important to differentiate to be very clear about what we're asking community members to do, especially and because we're acknowledging that it's important to have some perspective and voice from those who are most impacted by these decisions and are sort of experiencing these challenges. We also have to recognize that there's real barriers to their participation. So we have to be super respectful of what we're asking of them. It sounds like we're conflating potentially 2 different things. One is the governance questions that you guys are assembled to work on, which are a set of decisions that need to happen to figure out how are we going to do this. And then the other is really engaging the community in the creation of, an updated plan and vision for what Brown Ranch can be. And there's a valuable debate to be had about whether the information and input that's happened in the past remains valid to that end or not. But those are 2 different things. Essentially, the ability to bring the public in to help shape what can be built and what it looks like versus asking them to weigh in on a set of decisions that are more fundamentally around other mechanisms and tools and how we deploy capacity and resources to actually get from here to a point of even having a plan and annexation proposal to put out for essentially what, as Jason has said, is, eventually a public vote. And so I think that would just be important to delineate. I think to the degree we're talking about community engagement on the side of the sort of governance, you guys should really think about like, what voice do you need there? Do you need it? And just be able to explain why. I'm not suggesting you don't, but I would avoid thinking that by pulling people into the issues around governance and decision-making that you all are working to build a platform for today is the same as engaging the community meaningfully in discussions and decisions around what they want to see take place at Brown Ranch. So that's one fundamental thing. I think while I have the floor for one moment, I also just want to note regarding the question of sort of feeling like you're recreating the BRAC, if you wanted to go back and review the analysis of kind of what went wrong and what didn't in that, the membership composition wasn't really the challenge. The challenge was sort of the positional nature of it and the kind of the way it operated. And so I think to the degree you feel like you're landing in the same spot membership wise, from my perspective, I don't think you guys need to worry about that. I don't think it's a bad thing to sort of ask these questions about who else we might want to involve, but I wouldn't feel like you're about to recreate a broken wheel by arriving at the point of saying, probably some of the same entities need to be at the table again. I think that's probably evident. And then I think it's just important as we get into the questions of governance, because I'm worried that it's not coming out clearly enough, is that part of the reason you guys are in the room today and have committed this much time is because there really are concerns, practical concerns, internally within the organizations that are at the table, as well as within the community, around the capacity of the players that are here to do this and do it right. And I just think it's really important that we acknowledge that as fundamentally part of why you guys are here. For some people, that's a question of sort of bandwidth and throughput, and can these players actually pull this off? And some of them, it's a more fundamental question around trust. But I just think that that's important that everybody's clear on that, because there are some comments that have happened today that have almost suggested maybe that it's a different set of problems, and that isn't a part of it. And I'm worried, even though I don't want to be the one to stick my neck out on that if we don't acknowledge it, we might miss some things as we go forward. Thanks, Kel.
Clark, can you expand on your last comment?
They're
Sure.
making you stick your neck out more.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the, help us, sorry, I might have.
It's fine. I don't mind. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, there's part of the reason you guys decided that a first step before we get into working on a refreshed plan for Brown Ranch was the concerns about the housing authority and the city, but I would say heavier level of concerns on the housing authority and its ability to execute on Brown Ranch as an opportunity. That's not my position. And it's not my position. Like, my job isn't here to have a position. I just feel like it's important to acknowledge that that's part of why you guys are here. And that was an important theme of the DST and its concluding work. That the DST wasn't intended to really create ambassadors or anything. It was, as was discussed earlier, it was intended to bring people who really saw the problem differently together and see if they could problem solve together. And while there's a lot of things we could do to sort of change how we approached it, one thing that I do think was valuable is that by the end, we were able to isolate a number of things that really needed additional attention and work. And that was one of them, and potentially one of the more predominant ones. And I think then when in the fall, you all met to discuss how we move this forward, there was a recognition that we needed a change in structure and approach. And to be extremely clear about that, and Tom spoke to this earlier, part of the recognition was that there needs to be some level of changing the decision-making structure specifically, and saying, like, for us to create both the practical level of collaborative capacity we need to actually get this built, in part because of the city's inherent responsibilities in an annexing partner that would then be a part of the project. The city was saying, like, we're going to actually have to have some higher level of decision making, in this. And then secondarily, because of some of the fundamental trust challenges that had emerged, and again, I'm not here to say whether those are fair or not, but that had emerged over the course of the last couple of years and continue, that there was a need to kind of widen the aperture on who's making the decisions above and beyond the housing authority, because for at least some of the community, and I think some decision makers that aren't necessarily community, there was concern about the capacity to do that in the way that it was set up last time. So hopefully I'm getting it, hopefully I'm being clear enough.
Yes, that helped. Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge his first comment, which is the conflating of sort of the transparency and public outreach. I think is a really good point. I think it sort of goes to Jay's point that ultimately the folks that are directly impacted by this from sort of a financial standpoint and a responsibility to move it forward need to be the decision makers. And we can get the voice of the lived experience and the community through public outreach, community engagement. If we do that right, not saying it wasn't done, not done correct last time, but that's on our list of things to talk about. That's where we get that feedback and inclusion of that voice.
I agree.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and do just another check-in. I'm gonna do it based on the proposal given here. That we work to identify additional pathways for community engagement. With a commitment that this is important to this group, but that we move forward with the stated folks as voting members. Go ahead and give me your Vista 5 following that discussion. Okay. All right. So this puts heavy emphasis on figuring out what the community engagement looks like, right? Okay, but we have a sense of what the voting membership looks like. Okay, I'm gonna give us a little break from the community engagement conversation because I'd actually like to bring in some more language around that. And I want to go to decision making. So basic kind of options when you think about decision making for a group like this at the highest level, least expediency, biggest buy-in and inclusion is consensus, right? But it takes a lot of work to get to consensus. I would say I would recommend if you were an unfacilitated group, probably not the best way to go. But with the help of a facilitator becomes a little bit more viable. Also could have the benefit of building trust in the decisions that come out, knowing that it wasn't a majority vote. Next step down would be a majority vote. We'd have to consider issues like quorum and participation and attendance, that type of thing. It's a pretty fast version of this, right? The lower step down would be, well, I don't think we're even talking about that. The lower step down would be thinking about this group all giving advice and then the final decision going to the group that has the authority on things, which would be going to YVHA for a lot of these decisions. I'm hearing that we're at a higher threshold than that in terms of what's coming to this group for decisions. So would love thoughts on how you feel like this group should make decisions.
I'd just say, sort of to Jay's point, if we ever get to the point where Jay's like the deciding factor, we have a problem. So I would advocate for consensus.
I agree.
Any concerns with consensus? Yeah, give me, oh, nope, we got a concern.
Yeah, I do. I think that there's areas where we're just not gonna be, there's not gonna be consensus.
Okay.
And so my thought is that there are areas that we may need to just continue to move forward on without understanding that there isn't consensus, but that we could get near that. There's just mathematically, there's the simple majority of 4 of 7 advance something. Then there's a super majority of 5 or 6 of 7 moving something forward. To me, that feels like maybe the threshold. That way you're not necessarily
a hung jury.
What's that?
You're not a hung jury.
Totally.
So you're advocating a voting system.
I am.
In the event of not consensus.
Like you would need 5 votes to move something forward. And so you could have, let's just say, for example, Tom and I are like, guys, this is really dumb. And you're like, yep, we're going forward with it anyway. Everybody around votes. Somehow Jay's with the rest of the folks. Anyhow, that's a potential option. I'm just throwing that out there just there's several mathematical approaches to this.
Clark?
Yeah, probably. I lowered my hand because I was like, you shouldn't speak up. But I will. One thing for you guys to consider is given where you're trying to get to, if a group of people who, from the way I understand it, are all fundamentally committed to the idea of making this happen, can't reach consensus on the core issues, do you think you can get to a place where you're going to have enough community support to pass, in favor of a plan that's going to, get voted upon by a majority of the community and be able to succeed? I think that's kind of an important question, because if you guys can't agree, and I get the sense that everybody in this room thinks that this is important to try to get done, from my understanding. There's a lot of people out there that don't actually think it's important to get done. So if you're on the outside looking in and you're like, those guys don't fully agree, I just wonder if that is the right one. Practically, it might mean that you're not arriving at quite the best landing point. And two, the optics of that might be questionable for you guys. It's a worthwhile thing to consider, I suppose.
So, thanks, Clark. You took the words right out of my mouth to respond to Jason. I think we absolutely have a responsibility to all agree. If we have a voting system, we're setting ourselves up for failure right from the beginning. And I would disagree that there are issues that we can't agree on. There are going to be difficult issues. We have got to come to consensus as this group. If we can't, then Clark's right. The community's certainly not going to, and we're right down the same road we went down before.
Jason, can you give an example of what you think we wouldn't come to a consensus on?
I think probably one of the bigger ones is like just the city's fiscal situation. Might be a situation, but I don't know. I mean, I'm totally fine if we go down the road of full consensus. I agree with your statements. Like, I think they're spot on. The point of doing like a majority or a supermajority or whatever is expediency, is moving something along. But you're right. Are we moving it along at the risk of getting to the end and failing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of the problem last time, is that there were issues that we were fundamentally opposed, we couldn't agree. And at some of those decisions, we just said, we can't agree, we're just gonna move on. And the voting community was like, they're kicking the can down the road, they're not making the decision, and so we'll make the decision for them. And I just think that's would be a fool's errand to try to repeat that.
I think it's important to note that consensus here doesn't mean that there'll be consensus on our governing bodies who'll be voting on it. So, whatever this group brings back to their individual boards, there's going to be discussions, there could be split votes, and that's healthy. Yeah. But we need to be centered here before we bring that back to our governing boards.
Totally agree. Yeah. I can guarantee you there won't be consensus if there's not consensus here.
Yeah.
Right.
And this might interact with the piece that we talked about of like communication and transparency, is having a consensus vote that you arrive in gives a clear answer without split narratives about where you landed in some ways that could be helpful in producing narratives out of the group too. There's always the possibility that you introduce a stopgap measure of, if you try to get to consensus where we go through the revision process 3 times, can't, it goes to a supermajority. That is a possible hybrid of the two.
The other thing that I would say is that consensus at some level requires compromise. And that is going to be required.
And I do think there is value in having that conversation. I understand that it comes at the expense of it being expedient, but I do think it challenges us all, right, to say, okay, how do, keeping in mind where we ultimately want to end, how do we get there? And to the extent, how can we compromise and still stay true to the vision?
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and have a fist of 5 on making decisions by consensus. If that doesn't feel good, give me a below 3 and we continue talking about it. Okay, one,
Well,
two,
just
yes.
clarification. And
Yes.
so when we're talking about that, then that means we're basically embracing what we're doing now, right? From the consensus perspective, it's the 3, 4, and 5.
Mhm.
Okay,
So based on a Vista 5 system, 3, 4, and 5 constitute consensus. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right, would love to hear from Kathy.
I think it's impractical to think that we're gonna have 100% agreement on everything. And to me, that's what consensus means. I think we are, just like right now. And what that did is it gave me an opportunity to speak up and talk about the minority position. I think there's gonna be those opportunities that are gonna come along, and so I don't think, I mean, a very wise person once told me that if you can count to 4, and she was a city council person, so count the noses. That's what you need to get. You don't need 7, you need 4. And I think in order to move ahead, I think it would be great that the goal is consensus. But from a practical standpoint, I see us getting roadblocks. And not that we throw up, but that maybe even our technical experts coming in will say, I'm sorry, but that's just not possible.
Do you have an alternate proposal for the group of what?
Yeah,
like,
I think a
this is-
supermajority would be realistic.
Okay,
I don't agree with that if we've gone through like 3 revision processes. Like, like you were saying, the hybrid.
This process of being able to dissent and then maybe make amendments and things like that feels like a good way to get to like a process to get to consensus. I think the stopgap option, if there's not a realistic agreement, is agreeing on what the options are. You know what I mean? Like, there may be a situation where it's like, we all agree that the 2 roads that we could go down are options A and options B, and we do not agree on them. And there's consensus on the fact that there's 2 choices and both of them have positives and negatives. I don't know. I mean, to me, that feels like the way in which you get unstuck from an intractable position. And then it may take both of the boards getting together to come up with a solution beyond the scope of what this smaller group can do. You know, like Jay was saying, you get down to it, there's 3 things that you need to really tackle. Maybe that's the end. That's the end of the process.
so I hear 2 stopgap options. One is when we can't arrive at consensus, we present the things that we're wrestling with as options that we get further community input on. Knowing that this group can't arrive at a consensus. I hear you in favor of a possible try 3 times, then go to supermajority. Is that, you were in favor of that one?
I think so, in order to move the process forward. If everything has to come consensus, I think we could end up just blowing up in the middle of it over something minor.
but isn't are we deviating a little bit from the whole intention of this process? Right? I mean, if in fact we've got an end goal, we need to set ourselves up and put in place a process where we get to that end goal.
What if I'm just having a bad day?
We're gonna bring you a donut.
You know, I'm just saying, you know, if somebody's having a tough time getting over the one issue, and
Was there anything to say that we can't table that issue, put it on the back burner? Like you say, give the opportunity for time?
Or more feedback.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, the whole idea of the less than 3. No peace. I guess, I don't know, is an opportunity to discuss a different perspective, that's all. And I just have a hard time, maybe I'm optimistic, I have a hard time believing this group can't come to some common ground when somebody you know, as an objection. You know, I might be wrong, but
So is there anyone in this room that's not willing to compromise?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think I like the concept of if we can't get to consensus, we agree on what the options are and seek feedback from the community. And then that informs our ability to derive consensus.
But still doesn't guarantee a vote moving forward, though.
It doesn't, but I mean, it's like, if we can't come to agreement on this, it's clearly a big issue. It's clearly something that needs to be discussed more broadly. It's an indicator that we need to get some more feedback on this.
I agree with that, except for the bad hair day.
okay.
Not an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just to share some perspective, I think you guys won't need to worry about bad hair days or minor details because those won't be the types of things that'll hold this up. I do think, I mean, I'm simply saying, like, I think as a practical matter, what is most likely to happen is that to the degree you have a hard time reaching consensus, which does allow people to say, like, I'm not in favor of this, but I recognize, you know, like we need to move forward. So you have room for that and room to create space for problem solving within it. So I think, you know, this model will accommodate a lot of the concerns that I think are already there. That being said, there is a sort of modified consensus approach you can use, which is to actually apply a consensus decision to saying we're stuck. And then using that to say, great, what we're going to actually do is create a opportunity to clearly articulate the dissenting concerns and articulate those in a way that those who are saying, like, look, I really can't get past this, have had their opportunity to share specifically what those concerns are and to communicate those broadly in a way that the group feels that, you know, they can move forward with it with an understanding of what those concerns are. It may be in the context of a particular decision that requires identifying that this is a need to go out and get community feedback on. It may be that contextually that doesn't actually make sense. So instead, giving yourself the space to react to that dynamic in a way where, you know, you get to a point where you realize we're stuck, and then to articulate what it is that's causing the stuckness and arrive at the decision that we're stuck using consensus, so that there would be people, like, you may not agree on moving forward, but we can all agree now that we're stuck, right? And so it's time to apply a new model. So there are modifications to the consensus model that you guys can use that, you know, keep the fundamentals of it in place, and I think accommodate a lot of the concerns that you guys have around getting stuck. And I think, you know, fundamentally what it's going to come down to is pretty significant dynamics. I'm confident in all of you without a doubt that it's not going to be dinky little things. It's going to be meaningful questions. And to some degree, some of those, as you guys do get into deeper elements of community engagement, are going to be things that you're going to want to take out for community involvement anyway. When it comes down, you know, again, like, we have to differentiate the work of governance and decision making that you all are doing versus the other planning and design, like the work that needs to happen to actually get to the end point, right? There's going to be different containers for decision making, some of which will be in the space of community involvement, some of which will be through, you know, this body. And then there are going to be some that exist in other bodies, like existing councils, right? So I just think there's probably some modifications to get you guys there.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and take what Clark said, and I'm gonna try and summarize some of the things that I've heard. So we're gonna, the decision at hand is whether to move forward with consensus 3 and above fist to 5 model. If consensus cannot be reached, we make a decision whether to seek more feedback or capture our decision in terms of both the dissenting and supporting positions that we report back. Go ahead and give me your fist to 5 on that process moving forward. 1, 2, 3. All right, we got it. Okay. 15 minutes. I see some tired looking faces that maybe need another muffin or something like that. We can start the conversation about community engagement. That's the fourth element we need to figure out for just this governance group. I doubt we're gonna get to full decision making on that now. We could also use this 15 minutes to actually just figure out the really stupid logistical piece of scheduling.
Let's do scheduling.
Okay, that feels like more where our brain space is at right now, so I'm gonna go there. Okay, see, the way that I want to do this, so I know for sure we have some constraints. We can't do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning.
Those are completely booked in my world.
Okay. Any other constraints that we have on Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, Fridays that we need to also just take off the books right away?
Thursday mornings.
Okay, no Thursday mornings. Okay,
On the second Wednesday of the month, I have, Senate Producer Responsibility Advisory Board, it's a state advisory board.
okay, second Tuesday of the month,
Right.
and so Tuesdays are already on
I'm
the
sorry,
table.
second
Oh,
Wednesday.
second Wednesday.
Did I say Tuesday? I meant Wednesday.
Oh,
Right.
I might have.
And it is flexible, I mean, in the sense, but we don't know, like, we sometimes we cancel them, but we don't know until the month before.
This feels like a doodle poll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Okay, but this gives me at least our constraints, so now we're basically looking at, I'm guessing a Thursday, Friday combo. Unless you wanna do a long section all in one day. So doing like, we had initially put this out as doing meetings in 3-hour chunks. We can do 3-hour chunks back to back, so we do a 3-hour on a Thursday, 3-hour on a Friday, we could do 6 hours. Yeah, that feels like a lot.
No.
3-hour back-to-back days or 3 hours once a month. And then the process goes slower.
Yeah, I work on Fridays
Okay,
until April 15th.
okay,
And Thursdays are gonna be the most packed days. I mean, we have our board meetings, we've got
But that's once a month, so.
once a month, right?
Yeah.
okay, and you,
What week is that the second, what week do you have your board?
Second, Thursday.
Second,
So maybe the second week of the month is just
off the
not
table.
good.
Okay, but
Right.
we could do a Wednesday, Thursday combo of
Yeah.
afternoon.
Afternoons.
yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay,
Well,
So-
again, if I got my advisory board during the second week,
so we're,
it would be after Tuesday.
Skipping.
We're skipping.
Okay,
you're saying
skipping
skip the
second week.
Okay,
so now what I do from here is just to triple check, I do a doodle poll for Wednesday, Thursdays with these options available, and I get us our time. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and send out that doodle poll today, and if I can get your responses, what's Friday feel feasible? Or do you want
Yep.
Tuesday?
and can I just, again, right, sorry, I'm out of town, though, like the 18th until the 25th of March.
Okay,
So that narrows it down.
from what I saw, actually, this is part of why I needed to do a little scheduling here, cause our doodle poll failed. I think March might be off the table. I might try and see if there's some options there. But 18th through 25th is off the table, and then second Wednesday is off the table.
4th and 5th, no?
No, I can't do the 4th and 5th. The 5th,
That's all I do.
You talking April?
no.
We're talking
Next week.
March, I think, right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Next
so I
week.
think then we're
Yeah.
gonna have to look at April from here. Okay,
I'm going to-
so that gives you lots of time to think about community engagement.
I'm sorry, not the last week of March,
There's a week after the 25th.
well, like the 27th.
Yeah, the 29th, 30th, 31st.
25th, 26th.
Okay, let's just check on that to see if that
That
works for
Thursday,
folks
Friday?
real quick.
Oh, it was Wednesday, Thursday. You back on the
I don't
25th?
fly back on the Wednesday,
Okay,
Okay, 25th.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
26th.
have conflicts on the 26th.
That's our, we have a board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. No, on the
Could you
26th.
do the more, what time's the board
You're
meeting?
totally right. It's gonna be April.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm fine in April, except from the 16th to the 27th, so
Okay.
just the second half.
Okay, so then we're off on this second week, doesn't work.
First and second, probably.
So then you said after the 15th?
I did
You're available on
on
Fridays.
Fridays after the.
Okay, so then we have that available. When did you say on,
I'm gone the 15th through the 27th.
April first and second, I think, might be the
yeah,
sweet spot.
April Fool's Day, yeah.
this is just the case that then Clark, are you available? And maybe we can have Bill come in to facilitate, cause I'm not available then.
Yeah, end of March is I'll be gone with my family at spring break. I'd put that in the comments, but I was saying I'm the least
Okay,
we were on the March dates or the April dates.
April
April first and second.
Yeah, unfortunately, I will be not quite back yet. Somebody else from my team could take my role for that, but yeah, I know that consistency matters somewhat. The last thing I want to do though is be a detriment to us being able to move forward, but I will not be back at that point.
How about the 8th, 9th?
I'll be out of town on the 8th. We just did.
We're busy people.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a little stuck here, if anybody has any solutions,
So you said you're out the first, second, third,
and I'm out that whole week.
okay,
I could,
you don't have to change.
okay,
And the 26th, 27th of March wouldn't work. I forget.
no, that one, Jason had conflicts on the 26th.
Of March, you're talking.
Yep, of March.
Yeah, that's a board meeting.
Well, what time is your board?
Oh, noon starts.
We do it night as
So we can do it in
well.
the morning.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know for sure that's what his conflict was?
I'll check his calendar right now.
Okay.
Or your board meeting's over at what time?
Usually like 3 o'clock. And then I've got a planning commission.
Oh, right, can't, gotta do that.
Jason, we're talking about doing the morning of March 26th before the board meeting.
I know that's a rough day, but
We have need a vibrating seat cushion, so they're gonna get blood flow.
Yeah, I think that could work.
okay. Would it work to do one Wednesday afternoon and then Thursday morning?
Yeah.
Thursday morning.
Oh, yes,
that's
you're
right.
no going. Okay, that's right.
That's right, and you,
Either Thursday or Friday Thursday and Friday, right?
But we can't do Friday here
No, okay.
until April 15th.
Okay.
How about Saturday and Sunday?
I mean, we could get 1 3-hour meeting
Yeah. For what slot are you seeing? Just
Wednesday morning
yeah, I'm flying in
on the 25th.
25th, yeah.
and we can't do Wednesday afternoon.
How about
Mhm.
Friday,
Yeah.
the 27th? No.
No Friday until
Oh,
April
April
15th. Can we do Friday or Wednesday afternoon,
So
Talking about March 25th.
March 25th?
50-50 chance I'll be back,
Okay. Because of
a
flights.
flight.
It's gonna snow that day
Got
in New England.
it. Yeah. and like-
Exactly.
I'm flying from New England.
Oh, you're doomed.
Funny.
It might be our best option.
For June.
We can look at June.
Well, I think we gotta get together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yesterday,
Um,
so up to a table.
so then I guess,
Did we say? Okay, no Tuesday, well, yeah, Tuesday afternoon is hard for you and us.
yeah.
Am I the only one blocking Thursday morning?
Yes.
Depends on the Thursday, but yeah.
The 26th.
You have your leadership meeting.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm the only one blocking it, then I can skip that particular one.
And then I'll send out the doodle for the future dates, but we'll go ahead and book 9 to 12 on the 26th.
And the 25th is out.
25th is I'm out.
I'm black.
Mhm.
Okay.
Does it,
Okay.
does it help you if we start like mid-morning so that you can get the first half of that meeting in?
Yeah, I mean,
We have a board meeting at noon. by the
And
way.
we have a
Yeah.
board weekend then, so.
yeah,
Which we don't normally have that late in the month. So this is for the audit, so we have to get it
I
done.
would do 8:30 to 11:30 and let them go.
Okay, does that work for folks to do 8:30 to 11:30?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we've got a spot and then I'm gonna doodle other spots moving forward. Okay,
And block, and block out the 27th too.
No,
Nope.
that's a Friday.
no,
Oh, that's
we're
right.
just
Okay,
gonna
just
be
the
able to
one.
do
Okay, thank you.
one,
3 hour.
Sorry.
three
That will
hour.
get us through basically community engagement.
Yeah.
Conceivably.
Community engagement, I'd like to get us to towards the next piece of what's our end goal.
Okay.
So we start working on that.
Well, functionally, the timing of that works quite well to be able to report back out to our board.
Yeah.
At that meeting. This is what this group has come up with thus far, to get feedback from them.
But it might be helpful also from a council perspective too, when we have the report out on Tuesday, right? To also maybe solicit input for the for the 326 too, just in terms of what council's expectations or thoughts would be on community engagement.
Okay.
So if there's a way to kind of
We
frame.
get like a Google Doc and just maybe put down our thoughts and ideas on what community engagement looks like to individuals and then share it, so maybe get a jump on it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if there's anything we can do as a project team to support you guys in this, if there's ways that we can utilize the comment that was just made and or a small group might connect over the phone to talk through a few elements to share with the group just so that we're not starting from scratch.
I think a legitimate proposal around that would be helpful. And I think we can co-create that with input from our communications team, your communications team, and the.
Yeah, and I can tell you our communication team is gonna have very limited capacity.
Are there examples out there of other community engagement processes like this that have the selection of those groups that have worked well in the past? So
Yes, so I'm gonna go to slides real quick. I think it depends a little bit of. Let's see, where's my screen here? Okay. I think it's helpful for everyone to review so we have shared language around community engagement, at what level we're engaging folks. So there's slides later on in here. At what level or on what decisions do we inform folks, consult with them, involve, collaborate, or empower? Quickest example of empower is the annexation vote. It goes directly to voters. That's at the empower level of things. DST is really at the level of involved. They didn't have a decision-making authority, but they were asked to be a problem-solving partner in this. They were a representative group of folks, as best attempt as we could make. Whereas if you do like an open house, folks come in, they hear about the project and they give their ideas about it. That's at the consult level kind of thing. So I think one of the questions is at what level are we engaging? And then there's different processes depending on what level we're engaging folks.
Kale, can I make I make an additional comment to that? It's important to recognize that you don't need to, or typically in a more of a, like in a process, you're not always in one of these spots. So you can move in and out of different stages, but what's important is to understand like overall, what are we hoping and where are we trying to place decision making? And then there will be points at which you are asking the community to maybe make a decision, or there are points at which we're now actually we're informing on where something else landed. So that I'm not trying to confuse things at all as much as to say that if it feels scary, like, wow, do we really want to just sort of hand over decision making? Recognize that with the sense of intent that you guys want, and generally speaking, like we really want to have the community have ability to shape this versus we think we know what the community wants, and we just want to kind of keep them in the loop. If we have a sense of those types of ways of seeing engagement, from a design perspective, you can come up with different ways to move things along in a way that recognizes like there's going to be points at which we're fully over and empower and collaborate. But then, might be moments where it's more about consulting and informing. So I probably confused everybody, but the main thing I'm trying to say is that in general, you're not in one of these the whole time throughout an entire process.
But I think what I'm gonna do from here is make a Google Doc where folks can weigh in. And give you some guidance on questions to consider, things to consult with your different folks. And you can dump some thoughts in there as much as you have time or availability for it, and that's our first pass at this. To close us out for today at time, you saw in the tech version of this, I have the last slide of just how did this meeting go? I want that feedback at each of these sessions.
Okay.
So I do want to give a chance for you all to just give this in a non-tech version of this to 5. How was this meeting? 5, this was great. This went really poorly. I never want to come back again. Okay. Give me where you're at right now. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you all. That's helpful feedback. Feel free to send me anything of what's going to work to improve this going forward. All right, go enjoy some lunch. Thanks, Gavin. Thank you, Clark.
Thanks for the treats, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Dave.
Bye, online folks.